Hello, good evening, and welcome to Scotland at 7 here at Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart, and I am delighted to be here in what has been, by looks of things, quite a momentous day, but we'll get on to that. And I'm very grateful that I'm not going to be alone this evening. I'm here to welcome our regular guest and indeed friend of the programme, William Duguid. William, it is fantastic to see you. Welcome to the programme.
Glad to be here on such a momentous day. I'm holding my breath now.
Indeed, and we begin as we always do on day 629 of the illegal Russian attack on the sovereign state of Ukraine. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Russia is increasing its attacks across the front line, saying that Russian forces were attacking around Donetsk, Kupiansk and Avdiivka. Sergei Katsykurbanov, the former detective who was convicted for his role in the 2006 killing of investigative journalist Anna Politkovskaya, has been pardoned after agreeing to fight with Russian special forces in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has approved changes to the law that governs presidential elections by putting new restrictions on media coverage. The European Union will miss its target of supplying Ukraine with 1 million artillery shells and missiles by next March, according to the German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius. On Monday, local governor Alexander Progudin said that Russian shelling damaged a hospital and homes in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson, killing 3 people and injuring at least 12. Xi Jinping and President Biden are expected to discuss Ukraine, the Middle East, North Korea's ties with Russia, Taiwan, human rights, artificial intelligence in a meeting scheduled for Wednesday at the APEC summit. And at least 3 Russian officers were killed in the Moscow-controlled Ukrainian city of Melitopol in a blast Ukraine's intelligence said it was an act of revenge by local resistance groups. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and newly appointed UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron, or I think he's called Lord David Cameron till they work out what exactly to call him, discussed the Israel-Hamas conflict, relations with China and help for Ukraine during a telephone call on Monday, the State Department said. Secretary Blinken promised top Ukrainian official Andriy Yermak that sustained US support, including help to get through the winter, with Russia expected to strike Kyiv's infrastructure once more. Save Ukraine, an organisation that focuses on rescuing Ukraine's most vulnerable people, has said its rescuers have evacuated more than 108,880 people from the front lines since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022. It said its rescue network provided humanitarian assistance to more than 186,450 people, with its hotline operators fielding more than 160,000 urgent calls from Ukrainians who were in need of urgent assistance. William, one of the things that catches my eye in there, I don't know if it does yours, is the high hegians getting round to talk about all the things that are going on in the world. But one would wonder where the action is going to come from in order to see many of those discussions bearing fruit.
One is also interested to see what the league table of those discussions is these days with what's going on in Gaza, etc. And you read out a very long list of things that Ping and Biden would be discussing. And there's also a bit of a sort of dual purpose to the Blinken Lord Cameron discussions too. And so there is just the nagging thought that Ukraine, while still on the agenda, is beginning to disappear down the agenda a wee bit. And you know, one can't help but wonder if that isn't reflected in the EU, thinking that it might be missing its target of supplying the 1 million rounds of ammo by the end of March. And I find the same when I'm looking now for Ukraine in the news pages. It's not as easy as it once was. It used to be bang at the top and then it went sort of halfway down. And now it's on its own separate tab, but other things have taken over. And that is, to a certain extent, the way of the world. Things do move on in the world. but it's a serious problem for the world, just as the other things are. And any one of these, or possibly all of these, could have a major, major impact on the next 5, 10, 15 years of the world. So it's important that we get them right. So I'm glad that it is still on the agenda, but I'm wondering perhaps if the eye is quite as on the ball as it once was.
And I wondered, given that he's been announced as Lord David Cameron, if there are suggestions as to what his title actually will be. Wonder if there will be a postal vote as to, you know, like these gritters on the road and people vote for what they should be called. Wonder if people could get involved and perhaps suggest titles for him.
What, Brexit McBrexface or something like that? Lord Cameron of the ill-fated referendum. Yeah, uh, it's all a bit of a sudden rise back to the top for a man who had more or less disappeared, apart from slightly shady finance companies and things like that, like Greensill. And we thought that his day was gone and the rest of his life would be lived in a shed, albeit a fairly grand shed, I'm sure, and very plush in its furnishings. But suddenly, out of nowhere, not for the first time, but it's been quite a long time since somebody was elevated to the Lords purely to have a cabinet position. And it does rather raise the question about the validity of the 350 Tory MPs. I mean, I'm fairly sure that there isn't much quality there, but it is a bit of a slap in the face. So, yeah, David will be very interested in the future days, I think, and it'll be interesting to see what name he does take. And I'd be quite happy to indulge in a little bit of voting if anybody asked me to. He wouldn't like the results, but I'd still do it.
Indeed, and of course, he probably had to get out of that shed before Suella Braverman decided that they had to be rationed and taken away from people making lifestyle choices.
Lifestyle choice.
Indeed. So, and we don't have it at the bottom of our agenda, but very much prominent within our news reports, which of course is the latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 11,240 Palestinians have been killed, including 4,630 children and 3,130 women in Gaza by the Israeli military since October the 7th, according to the Health Ministry on Monday of this week. The Israeli military has reached the gates of Gaza's largest hospital as hundreds of patients, including dozens of babies, remained trapped inside. Thousands of people have fled Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, but health officials said the remaining patients were dying due to energy shortages. At least 32 patients, including 3 premature babies, had died in the past 3 days. Israel has claimed that it has uncovered a Hamas operations centre beneath the Rantisi Children's Hospital in Gaza City and claimed to have found evidence that hostages taken on the 7th of October were held there. All of the hospitals in northern Gaza are out of service amid fuel shortages and intense combat, the Gazan Health Ministry in the besieged territory has said. 2 major hospitals in northern Gaza, Al-Shifa and Al-Quds, have closed to new patients due to Israeli airstrikes and heavy fighting around both facilities, as medical staff were left without oxygen, medical supplies or fuel to power incubators. President Biden has said Al-Shifa must be protected and called for less intrusive action by the Israeli forces. The director of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, has warned that the group's aid operations in Gaza will be shut down in the next 48 hours unless fuel is allowed into the besieged territory. The UNRWA said that one of its schools in northern Gaza and a building designated as a residence for UN international staff in the Rafah area were directly hit by strikes. Excuse me. The UN agency also said it had received extremely concerning reports that Israeli security forces had entered 1 UNRWA school and 2 UNRWA health centres in the Gaza Strip with tanks and used them for military operations. UN workers observed a minute's silence on Monday for the 101 employees of UNRWA who have been killed in Gaza since the 7th of October. At least 3 Palestinians have been killed and 20 others injured after an Israeli airstrike hit Bani Suhaili, a town east of Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. The armed wing of Hamas said it discussed with Qatari mediators the release of up to 70 women and children hostages in Gaza in exchange for a 5-day Israeli ceasefire. Israel has rejected any possibility of a ceasefire until the release of all 240 of the hostages. Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen has acknowledged the growing international pressure for a ceasefire. The Archbishop of Canterbury has called for such a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas, saying the scale of civilian deaths and humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza cannot be morally justified. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has set out proposals for how Gaza should be run after the war between Israel and Hamas. EU foreign ministers are also looking at a Cypriot proposal to open up a maritime corridor for urgent humanitarian aid for Gaza. Tony Blair has let it be known that he is available if needed to help in an effort to end the growing crisis in Israel and Palestine. William, the most obvious thing in there is who should be quaking in their boots that Tony Blair is about to sweep in, put his underpants on the outside of his trousers, sort it all out, or is he just a wee bit jealous because Mr. Cameron has got a gig and he hasn't?
Well, he hasn't got a lordship yet, has he? Or am I wrong? I can't remember. I mean, he always sort of acted as if he was a lord anyway. It seems to be the week for comebacks, and yeah, Tony Blair got a great track record from promoting peace, so that should be very helpful. Um, I can't get over the man's ego, to be honest, but the whole situation remains just a complete mess. And interesting now to see Israeli forces muscling in on UNRWA territory. Presumably, they don't have any thoughts that Hamas might hit back at them, because otherwise that would be tantamount to using the UNRWA as human shields, which, of course, we would never want them to do. The situation in the hospital is just deplorable and awful. And when Biden talks about it must be protected, how does he see that working? Because the hospital has been damaged beyond repair. It has very little, if any, power or indeed water, and it's basically turning into a cemetery. So it seems to me to be just words that we're hearing now from the leading nations of the world, and nothing that gives any succor to the civilians and the medics and everybody who are suffering horrendously, and no sense that anything is ever going to give them relief in that. Even, by the way, a 5-day ceasefire for hostages wouldn't cut the mustard. We now have to be looking at a negotiated ceasefire that at least puts this to an end and starts on the almost incredibly impossible task of working out how all these folk are going to live in this small area of the world together for the next 50 years without killing each other.
Indeed, and 2 words that you used there was deplorable and awful, and I think those are possibly the only 2 words that were not in Suella Braverman's letter to Rishi Sunak. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has launched a devastating attack on Rishi Sunak the day after he sacked her as his Home Secretary. In a letter to the Prime Minister just this very evening, Braverman claimed that Sunak signed up to a secret pact to implement key right-wing policies to secure her backing during the Tory leadership contest in 2022, but then betrayed the country by failing to deliver. In what is a very brutal 3-page resignation letter, she has said that Sunak had manifestly and repeatedly failed to introduce policies including cutting immigration, stopping small boats crossing the Channel, bringing in post-Brexit laws and toughening up guidance for schools on trans issues. She is quoted as saying, "I accepted your offer to serve as Home Secretary in October 2022 on certain conditions. Our deal was no mere promise over dinner to be discarded when convenient and denied when challenged." After winning the Tory leadership contest when Johnson pulled out, Sunak stood outside Downing Street and promised the nation a government of integrity, professionalism and accountability. Braverman, who was reinstated by Sunak despite being sacked by Liz Truss just 6 days prior to her reappointment over a national security breach, continued in her letter, despite you having been rejected by a majority of party members during the summer leadership contest and thus having no personal mandate to be Prime Minister, I agreed to support you because of the firm assurances you gave me on key policy priorities. This was a document with clear terms to which you agreed in October 2022 during your second leadership campaign. I trusted you. It is generally agreed that my support was a pivotal factor in winning the leadership contest and thus enabling you to become Prime Minister. She continued further. For a year as Home Secretary, I have sent numerous letters to you on the key subjects contained in our agreement, made requests to discuss them with you and your team, and put forward proposals on how we might deliver these goals. She continued and she accused the Prime Minister of having manifestly and repeatedly failed to deliver on every single one of these key policies. She continues again, either your distinctive style of government means you are incapable of doing so, or, as I must surely conclude now, you never had any intention of keeping your promises. Braverman criticised Sunak's response to pro-Palestinian marches, over which she was ultimately sacked from her role as uncertain, weak, and lacking in the qualities of leadership that this country needs. She also claimed that Sunak was likely to fail on his pledge to stop the boats, regardless of whether the government wins or loses the Rwanda ruling in the Supreme Court this coming Wednesday. William, by heavens above, that's not going to get him in his next job. It's hardly a reference you would hope for from a previous employer. But it is in many ways dynamite, in many ways just to be expected. But has it got any real value in where we are now?
It doesn't take things on in the immediate future. You would think that she had resigned rather than been sacked this time round. And you would think that actually she had employed Rishi Sunak rather than effectively the other way round. So the obvious, I mean, I've no sympathy for Rishi Sunak, who I would probably agree with many of the words she used, but about him, but maybe not in the same context, because I don't want him to do all the horrible right-wing things, but I do want him to do some reasonable things, which he doesn't appear to be capable of. But yeah, nevertheless, this is a woman who's definitely got support somewhere in the party, or she could not write that sort of diva lecture. And she clearly sees herself as a leadership candidate in the not too distant future. And she may well be right. And she may well be quite happy to spend a period in opposition building up her dog whistling. It's gone slightly beyond dog whistling, as Owen Jones commented today, because the dog whistle has now become a loud hailer. But she knows her constituency. She knows the sort of people that will support her. And I think she would be quite happy to spend 3 or 4 or 5 years building up that level of support and then bringing in a Tory government, which I have to tell you, I can't see any other conclusion but that it would be unashamedly fascist. And that is where we have got to in this country right now. One of the reasons, just one, but definitely a compelling reason why Scotland has to get the hell out right now.
Indeed. And if you take the two things side by side, so Ella Braverman and her constituency, there is an argument that she appealed to the red wall voters who had given Johnson a chance, because there was a constituency in there of people who felt that immigration had gone on too long. They had come out of their front doors when they'd heard the dog whistle. They certainly had affinity with Braverman. By removing her and bringing David Cameron in, there is an argument that he's now looking at the blue wall seats, the ones that are perhaps under threat from the Liberal Democrats, where what he might be doing is bringing the Tory party back into a safe rump of key constituencies which you know they're likely to hold on to. And there has been a fairly universal kind of positive response to Cameron coming back and Braverman going, because the adults look as though they're coming back in. But we've been here before, because when Johnson was papped out, everybody said exactly the same. The adults are back in charge. And it looks as though They've had an empty and the parents are coming back, and the idea of if the future's Cameron or the future's Blair, then have we really not understood the lessons of history?
The lessons of history are notoriously hard to learn, as much of subsequent history proves. It does look like we're sort of falling back on old tropes again, and I really don't know where we go from here. I think David Cameron will find his second spell in the limelight somewhat less rewarding than his first one, because I think he comes in rather tarnished now, and he will go straight into the Gaza affair, and he has a history of being fairly supportive, among the more supportive of Israel in his time as Prime Minister. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays against what I think is changing opinion now in some of the countries that supported Israel wholeheartedly and its right to defend itself at the very start, and are now starting to see what's happening and really frightened of being on the wrong side of history. Lord Cameron may well find himself on the wrong side of history if he's not too careful. In terms of being the adults in the room, I sometimes wonder if there are any adults in that party. After it gets to past 10 years, this always tends to happen with a Tory government. It starts ripping itself apart. You've seen that in the COVID inquiry thus far, and you've seen it really in this letter. There's very much a wing in the party that will need to be continually appeased. Purely from an electoral perspective, probably the blue wall is the one to aim for, because I think the red wall will bounce back to Labour probably no matter what, and the blue wall is where the marginals are. It gives them a chance. I don't think they will get through the next election and stay in power. I think Labour will get in, but it gives them a chance. And bear in mind, my ability to predict the future, as demonstrated on this programme many times, is quite non-existent.
Well, I probably join you in that. But if Braverman is out of government, and you're absolutely right, this reads like I've resigned because you're a numpty. This doesn't read like I'm awfully sorry I'm going because I'm the numpty. And if she is going into the wilderness, and we're going to see those wilderness years, probably in her head she's some kind of Winston Churchill, when in actual fact she's more like an Enoch Powell. The possibility of her finding herself a rump of the party to lead and perhaps look for a charger to ride into government in the future on the back of populist voting. That seems to be a very, very strange and strained method, and maybe nailing her colours to a mast, if I may use that metaphor, that is not really going to pay dividends as we begin to see this type of politics starting to unravel in Poland, unravel in other parts of Europe, and also very much so in America last week, where many of the Trump candidates did not fare well at the polls. But I think, as you're right to point out, it's always going to be there, and there's always the possibility its re-emergence on the back of something like a Brexit, a Trump, might well end up with us in deep, severe trouble. So there is only one option, really, isn't there?
I think there's only one option for her, and she's never been subtle in anything she's done. So nailing any colours to any mast is exactly what she'll do, and she'll paint it in large letters of fire rather than whisper it, and that's probably her best bet. And a year is definitely a long time in geopolitics, and this particular coming year, there's going to be an awful lot going on, and it's going to have an awful lot of impacts that we really can't predict, no matter how good we are telling the future. So I think she has a plan, and she has some pals, and she's one to watch, no matter what's going on in the world at the moment.
And we go from that to more domestic ones to watch, as Sir Keir Starmer has come under pressure over the Gaza ceasefire. He's facing growing pressure to put forward Labour amendment to the King's speech backing a ceasefire in Gaza in order to prevent the possibility of his own MPs voting for an SNP motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. A meeting of Labour's parliamentary party on Monday was described as a bin fire by one MP, with a separate campaign by pro-ceasefire Labour members launching on Tuesday. Everyone is begging him to do it, they said, after the highly charged meeting late on Monday night, where the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy attempted to hold the party line. When the King's Speech debate comes to an end on Wednesday, it is likely there will be a vote on the SNP's amendment, which calls on the government to join with the international community in urgently pressing all parties to agree to an immediate ceasefire. Starmer is facing a rebellion by as many as a dozen shadow ministers who sources say are ready to resign rather than vote against calling for a ceasefire in Palestine, which Starmer has refused to back. Scotland's First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, has urged Labour MPs to vote for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Israel. In a letter, the SNP leader asked Anna Sarwar to confirm that Scotland's two Scottish Labour Party MPs will be voting for a ceasefire when the SNP amendment to the King's Speech comes to a vote. Commenting, the First Minister Hamza Yousaf MSP said, Keir Starmer's position against a ceasefire is exactly the same as that of the Tory government, which limits the degree of democratic scrutiny and debate in this vital matter. It's worryingly similar to the run-up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, where there was no difference between the pro-war policy of the Labour government and the Tory opposition, with disastrous consequences. People in Scotland want a ceasefire. That's why it is crucial that Scottish Labour's two MPs vote in line with the humanitarian stance supported by their leader, Anna Sarwar, which reflects mainstream opinion at home and abroad. A failure to do so will condemn those MPs as being on the wrong side of history. I suppose this is all kind of bound up in the whole thing to do with anti-Semitism for Starmer and the background with Jeremy Corbyn and all the rest of it. There has been a long, strong, proud tradition within the Labour Party from the 1960s, late 60s onwards, of being very critical of the Israeli government and being very pro-Palestine in terms of campaigning for them to have their own homeland. And here, like other things, like you're not allowed to go and join a picket line, this just seems like new Labour rather than real Labour.
Well, there's been within the Labour Party for many years quite a strong group of Labour Friends of Israel as well. And that has been around certainly ever since the Blair government, which might have been not New Labour, but the first New Labour. So there are now these two competing strands in the party. And I can quite understand how many frontbenchers even just cannot stomach the thought of not voting for a ceasefire when we see day upon day how bad things are. And still the leadership will stick to that a humanitarian pause is somehow the best idea, despite the fact it's been decried by all the aid agencies worth a damn, Amnesty International and Oxfam, loudest perhaps among them, and certainly not something that the UN would be interested in. I think, to be honest, they need to explain at some point what they mean by a humanitarian pause, because I don't see how it can possibly be effective. In fact, some of the things that the Israeli Defense Force has lately been saying about pausing for a couple of hours and here and there, it's almost a form of psychological warfare that's being waged. And it certainly isn't a way to resolve the problem. It's just setting them up for further damage. So Labour have a problem, and it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. I'll be interested to see if they have an amendment to the King's Speech calling for a ceasefire, how that goes. And then I'll be very interested to see how they behave if the SNP gets to bring its opposition day motion calling for a ceasefire. Will the Bain principle kick in, as the likes of Jackie Baillie would love it to? Or will they actually find a conscience, as Richard Leonard would love them to? And if they do find a conscience, then they'll find themselves out of favour with Keir Starmer. And where do we go from there? This is the party that thinks it's going to win the next election, and it's split right down the middle on a major geopolitical issue. So not good.
And it would have been very politically astute, perhaps, to have accorded those Labour Party members who support Israel's right to exist, but do not support the actions of the Israeli government, to have a space within it to allow them to vote for a ceasefire without there being some of the rhetoric that Starmer has been guilty of in the recent past.
Yes, there's absolutely no nuance to this discussion with our political leaders at all, which is frightening because the people are so far ahead of the politicians here, throughout the world, but certainly here. Just in terms of really getting the conflict a wee bit more and understanding the nuances. We know that what Hamas did was bad, but we know that things didn't just start on the 7th of October. And we know that what's going on now is something that we don't want as a human species to have on our conscience for the rest of our lives. And that requires quite a lot of maybe complicated thinking and holding two apparently semi-contradictory positions at once. But politicians don't seem capable of that. They have to double down. And I think that's a frightening lack of flexibility on all levels by politicians. But where it's going to lead with the world and its the population's relationship with its leaders, that could be one of the things that really changes what happens in the next decade or two.
Indeed, and today, domestically, there has been calls for the United Kingdom government to expand cost of living support. UK government ministers have come under further pressure to expand the financial support for people struggling with the cost of living crisis after the House of Commons Cross-Party Working Pensions Committee found that some had slipped through the safety net and that support payments designed to help people cope with soaring household bills had proved insufficient to meet the scale of the problem and offered only a short-term reprieve for many. The report released today said that the payments, first introduced in 2022, had a significant impact, but that many of those in receipt of them were still unable to make ends meet. In May 2022, the then Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, announced a payment of £650 in 2 instalments. In November of that year, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, increased this to £900 across 3 payments. However, the committee said this had not proved sufficient, and they were particularly concerned that those with disabilities received just £150 extra a year. The MPs made a series of recommendations, including adding those on housing benefit as a qualifying criteria for future cost of living payments and taking into account the size of a person's family, making the payment larger for households with more people. They urged the government to release an evaluation of cost of living payments before the start of the next financial year in April 2024. In its latest cost of living crisis tracker survey, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has said that about 2 million UK households have been forced to turn off their fridge or freezer to save money as they continue to struggle with what poverty campaigners call a frightening level of hardship. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation said that millions of families were still resorting to desperate measures to cope with rising bills and prices. It said, with 4 out of 5 households on universal credit also going without food, turning off the heating and not replacing worn-out clothing. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation's Cost of Living Crisis Tracker survey found that in October, a quarter, 2.8 million, of UK low-income households ran up debt to pay for food. A third sold belongings to raise cash, and 1 in 6 had used community warm rooms. The SNP have called on the Chancellor to address the inadequate levels of cost of living payments, coupled with the record number of households seeking support this winter. Commenting, the SNP Social Justice spokesperson and member of the Work and Pension Select Committee, David Linden MP, said, "The findings of the committee's report mirror the calls that the SNP have been making for months, highlighting the fact that the UK government's cost of living support has been insufficient. At the upcoming autumn statement, the Chancellor must urgently address these failings, whilst also introducing a £400 energy bill rebate, the reintroduction of mortgage interest tax relief, and take action to bring food prices down." William, it's a consistent thing that we hear time and time again, but the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have always been very clear in terms of where the poverty is and what support is particularly helpful. But we don't seem to have a government down in Westminster capable of running itself Never mind, as Thatcher once said, running a government is like running your household. And here the households that are living through the safety net, who are finding themselves increasingly in poverty, seem to have nobody out there who's going to help, certainly not in government.
That seems to be true. I mean, they say, we're going to do this and that's it. And they don't really stop then to consider what is actually happening and what are people experiencing and is this enough? I mean, they did make one tweak, as you said, when Jeremy Hunt put the total amount up. But even that is not enough. They say that, well, of course, our main goal is to bring inflation down, and we're kind of a wee way along the road to doing that. And that should help a lot, shouldn't it? But it hasn't helped energy prices. Energy prices are right up there and possibly creeping back up again. And of course, we have the potential for the oil price to hit the roof, which is going to bring another set of economic pressures to those households. We have an autumn statement coming up, which would be the prime time to do something when the Tories are actually talking about tax cuts so that they can then, well, they would have to squeeze benefits effectively to pay for them, they think. And that's grotesque. Perhaps it's the only thing they've got left to throw before the election, but it is simply not helping people, and they're now resorting to fairly desperate budgeting measures. And you can't go on like this year after year. The other fundamental thing that needs looking at is the pricing in the energy market. It needs to be fundamentally changed. It's currently dependent on the gas price, which is way up there, particularly when the oil price spikes. And it needs to be more representative of the way electricity is produced. That kind of fundamental change is better than the sticking plasters or the succession of sticking plasters that the government is grudgingly, increasingly grudgingly, putting on. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation knows that well, but I'm afraid it looks as if the evidence is currently falling on deaf ears.
And more economic news today as the latest labour market statistics have been released. This is for Scotland and the United Kingdom, covering the period from July to September this year. The key points from the figures are that early seasonally adjusted estimates for October 2023 from Her Majesty's Revenue and Custom Pay-As-You-Earn real-time information indicate that there were 2.45 million payrolled employees in Scotland, which is up 0.9%. 23,000 compared with October last year. This compares with the UK, where the number of payrolled employees had risen by 1.3% over the same period. Early seasonally adjusted estimates for October 2023 from HMRC PAYE real-time information indicate that median monthly pay for payrolled employees in Scotland was £2,309, up 6.7% compared with October last year. This is higher than the growth in median monthly pay for the UK over the same period, which was up 5.9%. Changes over time are based on median monthly pay estimates rounded to the nearest pound. Also, in October 2023, the claimant count was 108,700, which was up 300, 0.3% over the month, and down 2,900, minus 2.6% over the year. The claimant count unemployment rate in October 2023 was 3.6%, compared with 4% for the UK as a whole. Commenting, Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray said, "It's welcome that the latest HMRC early estimates show the highest number of payrolled employees in Scotland since the series began. In the face of ongoing challenges to the labour market, such as Brexit, the Scottish Government is committed to using its limited powers to support more people into work through employability and skills support. We have committed to expanded Scotland's provision of fully funded childcare, which is already the most generous childcare package in the United Kingdom, which can support more parents and those with caring responsibilities into work. The Scottish Government is also developing a lifetime skills offer for adults, and our apprenticeships programme is enabling employers to invest in their workforce and provide greater opportunities to those at the start of their careers. Industrial strategy, which will help, this will sit alongside a green industrial strategy, which will help businesses and investors to realise the enormous economic opportunities of the global transition to net zero and create good, well-paid green jobs across Scotland. However, with industries such as hospitality and agriculture still facing enormous recruitment challenges, an urgent reassessment of UK government immigration policy is needed to increase access to the international labour market that Scotland needs for our economy to prosper. With full powers over migration, Scotland could boost its workforce and tackle recruitment challenges, many of which have been caused by the end of free movement and the Brexit imposed on Scotland by the UK government. Well, you have a bit of a mixed bag in there about things being better and things perhaps being generally worse. But when you take it in the context of people struggling to survive, it seems to be tinkering at the edges, and if there's not a lot of support out there for people to pay their bills, then going for a job can be quite punitive because you don't have the ability to get yourself in a position where you're an attractive candidate.
That's true. And also, when you do get a job, increasingly we're seeing in work poverty. So getting a job is not the panacea that it once was. It is good to see real terms pay increases, but there's still a long way to go. And it is good to see that Scotland continues to do relatively well, considering the constraints on its budget and its ability to do anything about these things. And that's all good. But yeah, in broad terms, it's tinkering about the edges. And, you know, if you want the best for the Scottish economy and you want us to live up to our full potential, it's incredibly frustrating to watch the Scottish government knocking its pan in, trying to make things better and making things a little better, but knowing that a stroke of the pen down in Westminster will soon make it worse in one way or another. Perhaps ways yet to be disclosed, perhaps ways we'll see next Wednesday. So, you know what my answer to that would be? I think we need to be looking after our own affairs and really investing in our workforce and our people and our well-being. I'm very positive about the work that Neil Gray and his colleagues are doing on well-being, and I think well-being is the way forward for our economy. So bring on that day, and certainly I'll try my best to make sure we get there at some stage.
We go from striving to be your best to possibly the worst, as 8 people have been convicted of child sexual abuse offences at the High Court in Glasgow. And this was at the High Court today, where 5 men and 2 women were convicted of sexually abusing children in the Glasgow area. The offences took place between 2012 and 2019 and were reported to police in June of 2019. Following an extensive investigation, 11 individuals were arrested and charged in October 2020. Ian Owens, 45, Elaine Lannery, 39, Scott Forbes, 50, Barry Watson, 47, Leslie Ann Williams, 41, Paul Brannan, 41, and John Clark, 47, all appeared at the High Court in Glasgow today, where they were found guilty. An 8th person, Marianne Gallagher, 38, was convicted of assault. 3 others were acquitted during the same trial. They are due to be sentenced on the 4th of January. Detective Superintendent Nicola Kilbane said, "This has been a horrific ordeal for the young victims who were subjected to years of unimaginable abuse. Our thoughts are with them today, and I hope this outcome can help them in moving forward. The levels of depravity shown in this case are extremely rare in Scotland, and the courage of the victims was essential in securing this conviction. This was a long, complex and challenging investigation for a team of officers and staff who had to work through the most harrowing evidence to bring those responsible for these despicable crimes to justice. We remain committed to supporting victims of sexual crime and protecting children from harm and abuse. We will use all available resources to find and arrest the abusers, no matter how much time has passed. I would urge anyone who is a victim of abuse to speak to police in the knowledge you will be listened to, taken seriously and fully supported. Since the investigation began, we've worked closely with a range of partners in social work, health, education, Crown Office and the third sector to protect and support the victims." It's a difficult read, William. It's a difficult thing to make comment on, but it's a day that I'm quite sure the victims will feel that they have gained some form of justice.
I hope they do feel they've gained some form of justice. Yes. It is hard to comment on because, as you said in your report, it's so unusual to have this level of depravity. It's quite shocking and horrible. And for the victims, it's something they will probably never get over. And we have to be blunt about that. So the rest of their lives will be spent just recovering from this and making the best of it. So that's what makes the crime particularly bad, if it weren't bad enough already. Some of the details are just beyond belief. And yes, I hope they feel they've had justice, and I hope they can move forward, but I know it will be difficult, and I hope the rest of us can help them along.
And from domestic news, we go back out into international news with leaked financial data from Cyprus revealing that Kremlin-linked oligarchs moved assets after the Ukraine invasion. Cyprus has vowed to tighten controls on its financial sector as an investigation by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ, and its partners has revealed that oligarchs transferred hundreds of millions in assets while sanctions loomed after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The role of accountants, PwC Cyprus and other advisors in managing transactions as Vladimir Putin's forces launched their assault has emerged from Cyprus Confidential, a cache of 3.6 million files leaked by an anonymous source to the ICIJ and Germany's paper trail media, which shared access with other reporting partners. The massive leak of financial data from Cyprus also sheds light on how opaque offshore structures managed by accountants and corporate service providers in European Union member states may have enabled undisclosed payments to an influential Western journalist and potential breaches of rules around football club financing. The Cypriot government has responded by promising a zero-tolerance approach to sanctions violations as it battles to safeguard its status as a financial centre. In response to detailed questions from the ICIJ, a spokesperson said Cyprus was receiving technical support from the UK government to create a sanctions implementation unit next year, with plans to be submitted this month alongside a report on how its authorities investigate and prosecute financial crime. It has also joined an EU cross-border project on making rules around timing and enforcement of the sanctions against Putin, and the officials, politicians and business leaders close to his regime is now under scrutiny, both within Cyprus and around Europe. This leak has revealed the scale of Cyprus's role as a gateway into Europe for the Kremlin-connected elite. Among the 104 Russian billionaires Forbes magazine identified in 2023, two-thirds appear alongside family members as clients of the island's professional service providers. There are records relating to 71 Russian clients who have come under sanctions since February 2022. Many of these relationships have since been terminated, according to the advisors. The Cyprus Confidential files reveal PwC Cyprus and other advisors helped one of Russia's most powerful oligarchs, Alexei Mordashov, attempt to transfer £1 billion in a public company on the day he was placed under EU sanctions. The Guardian has been told the transfer is subject to an ongoing criminal investigation in Cyprus. €600,000 of undisclosed payments from companies linked to the same oligarch to an influential German journalist, considered a leading expert in Russia, to support the publication of 2 books about Vladimir Putin. And tens of millions in offshore payments made by Roman Abramovich during his ownership of Chelsea Football Club to agents, scouts and club officials that may have breached strict football rules on accounting and financial fair play. And undisclosed agreements that showed Abramovich and the super agent Pinas Zahavi to control the careers of 21 young footballers under controversial third-party ownership arrangements, which have been compared to bonded labour. This is quite a scandal, William. We see these leaking of files every so often. The famous ones, of course, we know much about, but this seems to be very, very much an embarrassing moment for the Cypriots.
Yep. I think they would like to be a financial centre, and this doesn't really help their reputation, but it does underline how big money and unscrupulous operators always find a way. I mean, the Russian oligarchs had to move pretty rapidly to avoid sanctions at the start of the Ukraine war, and it looks like they did it. And of course, they were assisted by the Cypriot arm of PwC, which hasn't particularly enhanced its reputation either. And so it goes with privilege and money in the world always. And we find out about it 18 months later, and we still haven't quite worked out how to fix this yet, but we might sort out sanctions next year. I think that was in one of the lines you reported. And the UK will be advising, because obviously we're the experts. Not a particularly enjoyable story to hear, but very typical of what we see.
Indeed. And back home, Social Security Scotland has delivered an astonishing £641 million in social security support last year. This comes as it's published its annual report and accounts, showing those payments amounting to £641 million in direct payments to people across Scotland, ranging from the 1st of April 2022 to the 31st of March 2023. The payments were made across 13 Scottish benefits, 7 of which are completely new forms of support, not available anywhere else in the United Kingdom. This includes the Scottish Child Payment, which has been extended to eligible children under the age of 16. More than 300,000 young people are now receiving this payment. The payments also include the new winter heating payment, which has helped almost 400,000 people on low incomes with their heating costs. The results of an annual survey of clients have also been published, showing that 93% of people who had been in contact with Social Security Scotland felt they had been treated with kindness. Among those who responded to the survey, 97% said they had received their benefit payments when Social Security Scotland said they would, and 90% said that their experience with staff was very good or good. A further 90% said staff listened to them, and 89% felt they were treated with respect. In total, the combination of direct payments made by Social Security Scotland and those paid through agency agreements with the Department for Work and Pensions saw the Scottish Government invest £4.04 billion in benefits across Scotland. Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Shirley Ann Somerville, said, "We are supporting families across the country at a time when they are struggling with the cost of living crisis and higher energy bills. We now deliver 13 benefits, 7 of which are only available in Scotland, and are delivering these payments while treating people with dignity, fairness and respect. Our decision to expand the Scottish Child Payment to all eligible young people under the age of 16 and increase the payment to £25 per week means we are supporting more than 1/3 children and making a significant contribution to tackling child poverty. As we prepare to launch Carer Support Payment, our 14th benefit, we are committed to making sure that people get the money they are entitled to and that people who are eligible know how to apply for our payments." That's kind of key, isn't it, William? The fact that people know that it's there and how to access it.
Yes, you don't want to have to walk through a minefield of regulations and ways of claiming benefits. You don't want it to be a fairly hostile environment, as I think universal credit often is in England. And what you want is for people to feel comfortable with the process. And that seems to have been largely happening here. I like that 93% think they've been treated with kindness. And the other high percentages of really things happening as the interaction with staff being as you would expect, professional, courteous, and really fairly efficient. So that, to my mind, knocks spots off what's available elsewhere in the UK, and well done to the Scottish Government in achieving that. Still a fair way to go. I'd like to get these figures closer to 100%. And of course, it's being done against an increasingly busy background, probably the busiest they've had in the last 5 years, with a 14th benefit, Carer Support, still to come. But very encouraging to hear. And of course, once again, hats off for the £25 child payment, which is internationally recognised as a game changer, and good on the Scottish Government for that.
Indeed. And talking about knowing where to get it and where to access it, there's reports today in our final report of high levels of early learning and childcare uptake in Scotland. The number of children accessing funded early learning and childcare, ELC, is continuing to rise. New figures have shown, and a total of 94,655 children aged 2 to 5 have been accessing funded ELC in September, up from 93,902 in August 2022, with just over 85,000, 90% of them benefiting from using the full 1,140 hours available. The latest delivery report from the Improvement Service also shows a year-on-year increase in the number of 2-year-olds accessing a funded ELC place, with a proportion of 2-year-olds accessing more than 600 hours increasing from a previous record high of 94% to 96%, covering from 2022 to 2023. Children's Minister Natalie Dawn said, since August 2021, all councils in Scotland have been offering 1,140 hours of high-quality, funded early learning and childcare to all eligible children. The continued high uptake of the Scottish Government's expanded childcare provision is positive news. We know high-quality early learning benefits children by supporting their development. Scotland's fully funded childcare package is the most generous anywhere in the UK, making an important contribution to household finances when many families are struggling with cost of living pressures. Importantly, this progressive policy also supports parents or carers into work, training or into study. The Scottish Government is continuing to work closely with our partners, both in local government and the wider sector, to ensure our early learning and childcare offer continues to make a difference for children, parents and carers. And amongst that, William, I speak, believe it or not, as a fully qualified nursery school teacher.
Wow.
That the early years framework has been significant in promoting the beginning of education in a radical way through the Curriculum for Excellence that allows children and young people to begin to find their feet. And it is a delight to see that people in Scotland are making great use of it by accessing the service.
And I can only add, it's another little part of the well-being economy, and that's what we need to be promoting. And I have nothing to add, my lord. That is just fine. Very good.
Indeed, and we won't do a competition to find what kind of lord we would claim that you were,
No.
as opposed to David Cameron and what particular lord he might be. We will no doubt find out in the days ahead, but you will hear that from somebody else, not from I, because that is it for this evening. Now, before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, on behalf of everybody here who volunteers, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. It is a commitment that we have made and one that we shall not break. But if you can afford £5 a month, we're asking you please to consider to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. But due to the generosity of our supporters, we have raised just under 21,000. But the remaining £9,200 is really urgent, and we could do with your support. And that could be for you to retweet, to like, to be involved in promoting what we do through social media, or indeed making contact with us if there's a possibility you would like to become involved, not just in front of the camera, but also behind it as well. It would help strengthen us, make us more of a movement, and indeed, hopefully, give you some benefit of the great things that we have to offer here in our studio in Broadcasting Scotland, in the north of Glasgow. So from me, Donald C. Stewart, and indeed from my guest from tonight, William Duguid, it is good night and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We're committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.